Hello, beautiful people. I've had the joy in the past week to watch both Superman and the Fantastic Four. I usually don't watch superhero films, with my only other superhero film this year being Thunderbolts, but there was sufficient hype and excitement for these films to warrant a screening. So let me start with my thesis. I think as a superhero film, Superman was much better than the Fantastic Four First Steps. I've reformatted my review here to explore why I thought Superman was better. I've listened to a lot of reviews online, many of which I disagree with, so I want to use this time to explore why I felt so different about the films that received overwhelmingly positive reviews from critics. I want to acknowledge that this is absolutely unnecessary. I know that the films are in completely different franchises with directors who have completely different styles. However, superhero films generally have the same aim: to entertain the broadest audience possible, and that includes me. So one of them didn't do as well, and I'm going to explain why I think that's the case. I'll also mention that I will have some light spoilers in here, but these films have been out for a hot minute, so if you have not watched them, I do actually encourage you to watch both of them. I do think that these franchise films are realizing we're not going to make money by giving people slop, so we can't be doing that. So without further ado, let's just get some basic facts about these films out of the way. All right, I decided to make a table. Is this frustrating? Does this bother your eyes? Let me know. I'll probably never do this again, but I just thought it would be a little bit fun. First of all, the runtime for both films is around 2 hours, with Superman at 2 hours and 10 minutes and the Fantastic Four First Steps at 1 hour and 55 minutes. Now, again, I didn't like the Fantastic Four as much, so I actually felt that time of almost 2 hours with the Fantastic Four, especially with the Marvel imposition of the post-credits scenes, which I didn't feel was that entertaining in this particular movie. But yeah, Superman also had a post-credit screen, but it didn't feel that impactful either. So maybe they're also letting go of post-credit screens. But here you go, you have a 2 hour long film, and considering the budgets of these films, that kind of makes sense. Here we have two directors, James Gunn and Matt Shakman. James Gunn is very well known in the superhero lore, with gaining a lot of popularity with Guardians of the Galaxy, and that inclusion in the Marvel universe as one of the funnier inclusions. I am absolutely obsessed with Peacemaker, so I love James Gunn for that. I know that James Gunn can be off-putting to a lot of people, but I personally find his style quite endearing. Again, I understand why it doesn't work for a lot of people, but it does tend to work for me. And there's hokey aspects of his style, but it's a superhero film. They're always going to have a little bit of hokiness to them. Matt Shakman is most known for TV shows, so that's what he's known for. Now the name is evading me, and I thought I wrote notes on it, but he did that really popular Disney Plus TV show with Elizabeth Olsen. Again, the name is for some reason evading me, but that was extremely well received, and I understand why Marvel thought that giving him the helm of this film was going to work in their favor, because one of the biggest last triumphs of Disney and Marvel was that Disney Plus television show. So it makes sense that they said, all right, let's do something. What's the one thing that people liked from Marvel in the 2020s? And let's make sure to give this guy that same opportunity to spark the crowd. So the writers for both of these films were interesting. Superman was clearly a one-man job, with James Gunn at the lead. Just to give context, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were just the creators of the Superman TV show. I remember in law school, whenever we did copyright law, it was very... there's a very famous case about the creators of Superman suing and trying to make sure their name gets on everything, which I do think they own and earned, because their comic strip, which it started off as a comic strip, wasn't that popular at the time, but then they started to realize they were getting TV shows and all of these different iterations of Superman, and they're like, nah bitch, y'all are not going to keep us out of the bag that you guys are clearly getting here. So that's why we see writing credit given to the original creators of the superhero. And then with the Fantastic Four, it was definitely more so of a room type thing, like a group project with Josh Friedman, Eric Pearson, Jeff Kaplan, and Ian Springer. And you can kind of tell that it was written by committee, and that's one of my biggest gripes with the Fantastic Four. but I'm sure everybody will have their different opinions. I just felt the script fell a little flat for the Fantastic Four, where there was more emotional spikes when it came to the Superman film. Now, both the casts have pretty strong ensembles, but I do want to shout out some people that stood out to me. With that being said, Superman was just phenomenal to me. With David Cornsweet, I recognized him somewhat from, I remember, I think House of Cards. I remember him being the guard. I remember actively thinking, like, who is that guy? And look at him now. He's now Superman. And I know that he was also in the Twister film, which I didn't watch, but that was his next biggest role after this. But I'm sure he's going to be booked and busy for time immemorial based off of the reception of this film. Rachel Brosnahan, she was in Miss Maisel, the TV show, and she's just really beautiful and wonderful. She has that really cute, like, pale esteemed look to her. Like, she'd be a courtesan in the British royal court. But yes, beautiful woman. Nicholas Hoult, a great actor. I do want to say, I think it's time for Nicholas Hoult to be the lead in a film. I know he's been the lead in several films before, but they tended to have smaller budgets and definitely not be the blockbusters that you'd think he'd helm. So it's time for Nicholas Hoult to get his big old role. Now, a standout to me, somebody who I didn't and wasn't that familiar with, was Maria Gabrielle de Faria, who plays the engineer. I really loved her. She just had this sternness to where that was really well suited for the role, and I believed every time she was on the screen. Some people did not like the fact that Green Lantern, Mr. Terrific, and Hawkgirl were here, but I did. So Eddie Gaetti, Nathan Fillion, I love them. And then Anthony Carrigan, my love. I loved him in Barry. I absolutely fell in love. So I felt really excited that he was here, and I think he did a good job. But in general, what I will say for Anthony Carrigan, and I'll have the same comment for Ebon Moss-Bachrach, is that when you kind of are CGI'd into a film, it kind of hurts the ability to see your acting skill go full throttle. I don't know how to explain it. It does. There is some block there. And it's interesting because right before the Fantastic Four film, they did show a preview or a whole trailer for the new James Cameron Avatar film. And I feel like that film is very different because despite the fact that these characters are CGI'd in, there is a lot of emotional expression in the character design for the Avatar. And so that makes it a lot easier for them to actually show their acting skills. Whereas both Anthony Carrigan and Ebon Moss-Bachrach in the Fantastic Four, I felt were a little held back in their abilities. So with the Fantastic Four, we of course have Pedro Pascal, who's been essentially in every single movie. And I think maybe one of the reasons I also really wanted to watch a Fantastic Four was because I'd already watched The Materialist. I'd already watched Eddington. I was like, let me watch everything Pedro Pascal is in this summer because you know what? It'll be interesting. Vanessa Kirby, I'm not too familiar with her, but she, I think, did a great job. As I mentioned, Ebon Moss-Bachrach, who received a lot of attention for his role in The Bear, is here in this film. And again, I kind of feel bad for him because he was not able to show his full form. Joseph Quinn, who's had a pretty eventful summer, I think he's just been in a lot, and it's clear that he's kind of on the trajectory to be one of those men in Hollywood that is always in a blockbuster or a movie. It'll be interesting to see if he'll inevitably one day be able to actually be the lead in a film or a movie. We have Julia Garner, who's always in a lot of movies. I just bought tickets to see Weapons, and I know it opens next week, but I'm so excited. Just the trailers for that film are just so great, but she does a pretty good job here. But again, the same CGI mess where it's like, I know you're acting and you're doing stuff, but I can't really tell you. For an actor who's not acting in a film, but just voicing a character, we have Ralph Ineson in the Fantastic Four as Galacticus. But his voice is so iconic and wonderful. He was really great in Nosferatu. He was just a standout to me, even though his role was pretty small. So I was happy to hear his voice here. He just has such an iconic voice. Paul Walter Hauser, don't know him that well, but he was pretty funny as the mole. Natasha Lyonne, she hardly was in the movie, but she was there, so I pointed her out. And then Sarah Niles. So people who should watch Superman are definitely James Gunn and Superman fans. And I know that sounds pretty pejorative and pedantic, but yeah, I really do believe that if you're a James Gunn fan, this is the film for you, as well as Superman fans, because I do think it has been a while since we've seen a Superman film return to form. When you think about the original creators of Superman and the strip comics, and Superman going around the United States and saving and helping people, this is a film that returns to that form, where it's just like, he's a guy who really has the best interest at heart and mind, and he might falter in how he executes what he thinks is the right thing to do, but ultimately he does have those intentions. And then for Fantastic Four is about people who are interested in Marvel's return to form, because Marvel has deviated. Marvel has not garnered a lot of attention in the past couple of years. They have just been really dogged down by everyone with more, and it has also become political, unfortunately, even though it was totally not necessary. So this is a film, The Fantastic Four First Steps, for someone who's just like, I wonder what's really happening here. I wonder if Marvel could fix it. And again, I didn't like the film as much, but I definitely see this as a much better film. I would argue, no, I think I like Thunderbolts a bit better. But let's get into the specifics here. First, what I was fascinated with both of these films was all the similarities. So I want to talk about the similarities first, because I did find it fascinating that these two different franchises, two very different films, could have such strong similarities in how they approach the story. And yes, both of these films are in the same genre, but I do think they break form in the same way that I found fascinating. Again, that they did this in a parallel time period. First, both of them begin in media res. After over 10 years of superhero box office dominance, studios are realizing that outside of truly obscure and unknown superheroes, origin stories can only slow a film down. Even when people are truly unfamiliar with a hero, most origin stories can be inferred by the present actions of these superheroes. The main difference is that the Fantastic Four has a more formal introduction through a Ted Gilbert show montage, while Superman really just thrusts the audience into the middle of the action. It makes sense. To be a breathing American with no relationship to Superman lore at this point is rare. And even if you're not familiar with the lore, you're unlikely to be watching this film in the first place. And I do wonder if they could make a poll about how many Americans are familiar with certain superheroes and their origin stories. That kind of be interesting, but I rarely find people who don't know that, like, Superman is from outer space and he came to Earth and now he's saving and helping us all. All right, let's get to the second similarity, which is that both of these films place action in a distinct environment from the general franchise vibe. Now, this makes sense for James Gunn and Superman, because James Gunn was tasked with reinvigorating the DCU and Superman in his first foray into the new universe. And he recognized that the DCU had this really grim vibe. They were trying to come off of Batman, which was extremely popular, the Christopher Nolan Batman. So they tried to replicate that, but James Gunn has a completely different style. And also, I think we're living in such dark and sinister times that people are realizing we're going to need some more bright energy. And the Marvel Universe has been mired by conflict and ill-received stories, and all of these stories having to be interconnected. And the Fantastic Four offers an opportunity to remind the audience why Marvel attracted such a large audience in the first place, and provide a clean slate story that enhances the core elements of a good Marvel film. And so the Fantastic Four is the first Marvel film, I think, ever in a while that really has no direct connection to any other stories. And they explain it away by showing that the Fantastic Four are in a different universe than the universe we tend to see in the Marvel, but it was still pretty exciting to see, and it'll be interesting how this affects. I believe they're not the Avengers, but they have an Avengers-like film that's going to come out soon, of course, with Robert Downey Jr. playing Dr. Doom. So it'll be interesting to see how this film, which seems so self-contained, is going to impact other things happening. Maybe Galacticus will come back. I hope not. And I'll talk a little bit about my thoughts about the villains in this next slide. So why I think Superman works better. First, Marvel is still being safe. While Gunn has received a lot of criticism for the parallels between his films and real-life political events, I think the symbolism makes the film more interesting. Marvel still has to play it safe, and it ends up making a film that feels stunted and uneventful. Gunn takes a huge creative risk by setting up an interview scene between Lois and Superman early in the film. The interview provides a lot of exposition, but it also places us squarely into Superman's mindset. Superman is a bit arrogant about his skill in deciding the best utilitarian outcome for the world, and he feels entitled to praise, and Lois is the first person to force him to confront his mental fallacies. Whereas Marvel just puts these four characters and just shows them being absolutely loved and adored, there's no question about, maybe we should be a little skeptical about the people who come from space and then have these random superpowers. And yeah, there was a lot of factors about the Fantastic Four that I felt it was harder to get into, because oftentimes it felt like they were expressing emotion but not really evoking it from me, whereas in Superman there was true emotion felt. All right. Another factor is that it's just harder to get people invested into a team of four and the characterization of these four team members as well. There have been many attempts to serialize the Fantastic Four, which found popularity in America through cartoons, but all attempts have failed. I definitely think the latest iteration is the most successful, but there are still many issues with bringing this family to life. In part because the film has to familiarize the audience with four heroes, it can complicate the depth accessible in the plot. Ben, or the Thing, played by Eben Moss-Bachrach, is completely underutilized and underdeveloped. I think Moss-Bachrach is a great actor, and he has limited big screen opportunities to show his talent here. This film didn't give him any opportunity to showcase his skills, and his character sometimes felt like an afterthought. Like, literally all his character would do is randomly go back to his home neighborhood and see Natasha Lyonne and clearly crush on her, but nothing more than that. It was really flat. And then many people have claimed that Pedro Pascal was miscast, but my issue with his character is an issue I found with all the members of the Fantastic Four, which is they were all flat. They expressed emotion, but they couldn't evoke emotion. The script simply didn't give them a lot of emotional depth to play with, and I think the direction from Shackman exacerbated the issues with the writing. So this is also a frustrating thing I get when people claim certain people are miscast. You have to understand that actors are directed to perform a certain way. And I just feel like the way that Richard Reed could have been depicted in the first steps is something that Pedro Pascal could have acted. But I think he was given direction to be this more muted and anxious individual that didn't really work very well. And I didn't get the charisma from him. But we know Pedro Pascal could be extremely charismatic. So I'm a little confused as to why this is why people are blaming Pedro Pascal for not being a good Richard Reed, when I would argue a lot of it has nothing to do with casting. I think that there's direction in screenwriting that has more to blame with this. Am I a Pedro Pascal defender? Yes, but I genuinely just don't think that it's Pedro Pascal the issue here. I felt like all four of these individuals did the best they could with a script that didn't give them a lot in terms of exploration of emotional depth. All right. And of course, in Superman, we have wonderful, wonderful cast. And I think David Cornsweet, Rachel Brosnahan were fantastic. Nicholas Hoult, I really liked. And I know some people say they didn't like the speech that Lex Luthor gave towards the end of the film, but I kind of got it. I definitely do kind of agree that it could have been dispersed throughout the film in a more meaningful way, but I personally thought that it didn't disrupt me. And also, a lot of people said they didn't like the Justice Gang, but I really liked them. I liked Nathan Fillion. I liked Mr. Terrific. I thought he was really awesome. Hawkgirl, again, given a kind of breadcrumbs to work with here, but she also did a pretty great job. So I didn't feel cheated that these characters had one-dimensional arcs, because I knew that they were supposed to be side characters. But I was a little disappointed in the Fantastic Four, because here we have four characters, but it felt like, in a way, in trying to distribute, time to all of them kind of became side characters to a story where they were supposed to be the main characters. All right, let's get to one of my biggest gripes, which is the villains. I just didn't understand the villain in the Fantastic Four. In Superman, Lex Luthor is great as a foil because you could see how his ego would motivate him to go to these lengths. He reflects real-life egomaniacs, and we see how it wasn't a pipe dream to eliminate Superman. He could really do it. Moreover, because the film introduces us to the idea of metahumans, we are better equipped to understand why there are so many interim fights with these little other villains that pop up. In the Fantastic Four, I didn't really understand why there was a need for superheroes in this world in the first place. They literally show all the world eliminating the need for armies. Of course, they're setting us up to anticipate Doctor Doom breaking that rule, but alas, we see some enemies in the form of Mole Man, but otherwise it appears the Fantastic Four live in this idealistic world, and it's only when the eating king like Galacticus comes into the picture do people have to worry about true existential threat. So it's just fascinating to me to watch all of this unfold and think to myself, yeah, like I don't get it. I think one of my biggest issues, I couldn't invest in the Fantastic Four world. I really couldn't. And maybe there's something to be said about the Superman story being about real life, sort of attracting me to, like, well, what does James Gunn actually do think about these things? And even though it doesn't really give us any true answer, I thought it kept me interested in the plot as it moves forward. And I also understand that there's a lot of people who hate seeing the real world in their fictional work because they see superhero films especially as a form of escapism. So yeah, but I also know that the Captain America 4 also tried to do true real world parallels, but that did not work at all. So I would say James Gunn clearly has a skill here that other superhero screenwriters don't. Anyway, the need for Superman and other superheroes in Metropolis makes more sense to me, since some metahumans would clearly take advantage of their powers for evil. And again, Lex Luthor, while extremely self-involved, feels more real just because we see variations of him in real life. Galacticus was a real threat, but it didn't explain how the Fantastic Four reached their venerated position in the first place. It's like, it felt like these, I guess, people do love their astronauts, but they came back and then suddenly they were venerated. Nobody had any skepticism about, like, well, how do we not know you got some alien life form in you, and that's going to cause us issues. So very fascinating. And finally, babies and dogs. I want to talk about this. This is just me ranting about films literally putting infants in danger. Look, we don't believe you. That baby is going to survive. I also want to say I just hate CGI babies. This also happened in Squid Games. I hate CGI babies. They are uncanny and kind of scary. And I know that there are evils of child acting, but I think we can make a rule that I know a lot of people are going to disagree with. Get a baby on the set. And actually with the Fantastic Four, I will commend them. I could tell that there was a literal baby on the set, or maybe they had really good CGI. I don't know which one. The only time that the CGI baby was extremely distracting is when Ben slash the Thing slash Ebon Moss-Backrack was carrying the baby, and I was like, oh girl, you should have given that to Joseph Quinn. Joseph Quinn should be carrying the baby. And you could tell that the reason why the script had it Ben carrying the baby was because Ben hardly had anything to do in the entire film. And so he had to carry the baby to be like the big fun uncle. And it's like, I don't know, like, sure, all right. And also when it comes to dogs in the story, let's watch how that dog is being treated. Even a super powered dog. Y'all be showing tortured dogs. Now I gotta look at you weird for putting a cute puppy in that situation. I do understand Crypto and why he had to be in the situation that he was in, but it was uncomfortable to me. There was this lady in front of me in the row in front of me who literally gasped so deeply. She was so offended by Crypto being, tortured the way that he was. Although it's kind of a cute torture, but still it was torture nonetheless. So yeah, I like Superman better. I think James Gunn is a better screenwriter. I might write something more in depth about Superman simply because it intrigued me so much. And yeah, I really think that the superhero wars are going to continue. I think that, and I maybe have mentioned this in a script before, but in reality, I think that film world is only going to recover and really be massive the moment that superhero films die altogether. We have always lived in a film environment where there have been giant trends that die. It used to be that films couldn't be made without a lady singing. You had to have a musical because musicals were the reasons why people came. And then there was a time period when it had to be a Western. You had to be out there. Cowboys and Indians. As racist and as ill-informed as many of those screenplays were, you had to be out there doing that. And even remember the Italian gangster era? Every film had to have an Italian gangster in it after Godfather. Why was that? Why? Why? They literally went through all the major capos in each major gang, Italian mafia gang, and once they ran out, but they had to go through each and every single one of them because mafia movies were so popular. But trends are supposed to die, and I think the thing that troubles me the most is it does feel like this trend is surviving a little bit longer than prior trends. And of course that is because these are mega blockbusters and they're making a shit ton of money, but it doesn't change the fact that in a healthy economic environment for artistry, things shift, things change, and people don't have hold of power for this long generally. So we'll see what comes of it. I definitely think James Gunn is shaking the table a little bit, and we'll see what he's able to do. But I think Marvel's a little bit of a mess. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'm gonna continue watching these films. I've already watched Thunderbolts. I feel like I've kind of stuck myself into watching all of these superhero films, even though I tend not to like them. But we'll see. Let me know if you like this version of a film or a review better. I kind of wish now I'm like, I'm just telling you my feelings. I wish I wrote the screenplay a little better, did a little bit more research on these things, but maybe that shows a little bit how I feel about superhero films. But let me know. I really did like both of these films, which was a surprise to me. So maybe I have misjudged superhero films all along. Until next time, thank you for watching. This was Strategic Delusion.